perfect guest joining us here today, Deborah Roffman. And Deborah's going to be sharing with us a new book that she has out. And this is a book that is published by Birdhouse Kids Media. And we're excited to get to collaborate on helping this book come to life. And to get us started, and I'm Melissa. My name is Melissa. My pronouns are she or they, and I'm the founder of Sex Positive Families. I'm a fellow sexuality educator, and Deborah is certainly someone, whenever I started focusing my work several years back into the realm of working with parents and families, Deborah was absolutely one of those educators who's been doing this for years before Sex Positive Families ever existed. And how I was introduced was through your book, Deborah, Talk to Me First. And this is a book that you can find through the Sex Positive Families website. Also, Deborah's website, sexandsensibility.net. Deborah's also the author of other books as well. And then the book that we'll be sharing with you here today. Deborah, I would love for you to introduce yourself. I know how important this project is to you, both professionally and personally. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about what makes this so meaningful to you and how you came to even doing this work?
Thanks so much, Melissa. And I want to thank you and Sex Positive Families for making this webinar possible and for your support of my books. I cannot thank you enough. Let me talk a little bit not just about what I do and what I've done, but I have a dream. And this dream evolved out of my work literally over decades with families and schools and young people of all ages. I've taught every single grade level practically. In a K through 12 environment, or I've supported teachers and parents who have children at every single age group. And what I realized many years ago is that we're leaving the youngest of our children out in ways that are not helpful to them. In fact, ultimately may in fact prove harmful to them. So here's my dream. My dream is that one day, in the United States of America, and why not? Let's dream about the world, that it will be families and schools who are the primary, and what I mean by primary is first and most important. And the next phrase is really key, reference points in children's lives around issues connected to sex, gender, and reproduction. And what I mean by reference points is that we get there first. No matter what the topic is, they hear about it first from us, and therefore they have our lens on how we want them to see these issues in front of their eyes, and they have our voice in their ears, and they have the way we want them to understand these issues embedded in their memory cells. And everything else they ever see, hear, read, overhear, etc., will have to be filtered through that. And that's the dream. And it also is a dream that makes research sense. Not just, I'm hoping people are hearing this as very logical, but in families where sexuality is openly discussed from early ages on, it's been documented over and over and over again that those children grow up and make better decisions in regard to themselves and others. And we shouldn't be surprised by that, because what we're really doing year by year is teaching them how to think about these issues, and people who know how to think about things make more cautious, deliberate decisions. So that's my dream. And I hope that, I'm so audacious that I hope it will become everybody's dream.
Absolutely. And I'll say that, social media has been a powerful tool, right, that has allowed these messages to expand even further. And so I'm encouraged daily with how many families and communities are out here literally around the world that believe in that dream and that are working toward that dream every day in their homes, in their schools, and so much advocacy, right? We're seeing so much advocacy these days around sexuality education, and communities really taking a look at what are we, well, first of all, are we teaching sexuality education? And what are we teaching? And is this what we should be and how we should be approaching it? And so the work that you have been doing and that you continue to do, you know, I love again that dream. It's helping to create that bridge and help to build that confidence and that clarity in the adults that, you know, can act as gatekeepers if we're not careful, right?
Right. Yeah. And sometimes I ask people to like give American culture, let's say, a grade on how well we're doing. And the most common grades are D or D minus. That we're not getting there first. And what we do when we don't get there first is we turn them over. After all, they're still curious to the default options out there, including the internet, as their primary reference points. And this is one of the reasons why I wrote The Science of Babies. In most elementary schools in this country, for example, are 3 to 5 years late teaching basic benchmarks of knowledge, even around the basics of reproduction. My goodness, just like think about that.
Yeah.
So, and part of it is that people really don't know what is cognitively appropriate for children in the early childhood stage of development. So the book is really, and not just a sit down book and talk with your child. It is, okay, adults, let's get a handle on what is truly stage appropriate for our children. And if we do that, then we will get there first.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So these questions, these early questions that very common and age congruent for young people to be asking about their origins and about, you know, how humans are created. Why are these so hard? Why do they feel? What are some of the reasons that you've observed, that you've come across, why adults, parents, and even systems, school systems find this so challenging to answer or to address?
So I'd say decades ago, I noticed that when didn't matter where in the country I was speaking, didn't matter the region, didn't matter the educational background of the people that I might be speaking to, they were all sort of clueless about, how do I do this? What do I say? What do I do? And it struck me that it was so profound and so everywhere, that it struck me that this is almost like a cultural disability for us. You know, we are smart people, we have common sense about so many things, but it was the absence of common sense about this that really intrigued me. So I've been looking at that very question that you just asked in a variety of ways over these years. And I think there are any number of reasons to explain it. One is that we grow up without role models. How do we know what an adult is supposed to look and sound like when they're engaging in conversation, particularly with a young child, around issues of sex, gender, and reproduction? And also and feelings like embarrassment are very catchy. We were not born embarrassed about this subject. Absolutely. But if people around us are embarrassed, we catch those feelings, and it's not a feeling we particularly like. So we avoid situations where we may feel that way. And also, I think this might really be the root of it. For most of us, when this subject came up in our families, what we sensed, and children are vacuum cleaners for feelings, we sensed anxiety. There was something about this subject that was making adults anxious but they also communicated, and I don't want to talk about it. So you never got to find out what they were anxious about. You just associated it with anxiety. And the last is a myth that is probably hundreds of years old in this country, that knowledge is great, it's fabulous, except around this subject. That knowing might lead to something bad. We don't quite know what it is.
The doing, right? Knowing might lead to the doing.
Might lead to the doing. If knowing leads to knowing. See, we have common sense about that when it comes to other subjects, but not around this one. So that remember always what I said before about the research, which is this knowledge doesn't speed things up, speed kids up, it slows them down.
I love that.
So we have to get rid of that, because after all, if you're a parent, your first sense of responsibility is protection. And if you think that there's something here that isn't quite right, I'm going to hold on to that knowledge. And that virtually guarantees that we're not going to be their go-to people.
And like you said earlier, and what so many people are having to reckon with is, if you're not talking about it, something else will. It's a lot more of a thing,
It's
via the internet, right? Via Pornhub, via all these media sources, or, peers and friends. And what we talk about a lot, is the research that supports that young people actually want to hear about it from their primary caregivers. They want to hear about it from parents. It's actually not their peers that they see as most influential when it comes to their sexual decision making. So creating these resources like this, the books that you do, and the workshops and speaking, all these ways in which you're helping families and adults in the equation just feel more confident, is so needed, because we've got to really keep deconstructing this. It's not helping us. It didn't help so many of us. We have evidence from a lot of our lived experience that it didn't help us to not know, to be left in the dark.
Right. And it's not just around information. If they weren't talking about this, they weren't applying all those wonderful life lessons that they were teaching us all the time about decision making and communication and responsibility and respect. We weren't saying, oh, and by the way, that pertains to sexuality as well. And here's how. And I know I grew up having no clue how to deal with situations that I inevitably, and most people inevitably find themselves. I like to start my parent talks often by telling parents, I know the big secret of doing this subject very well in your children's lives. And I say, are you ready? Here's the secret. There's no secret, right? We have so many double standards about this topic. All we need to do is treat it just like all others. And the other thing that gets in our way, and this is what the Science of Babies really endeavors to accomplish, is no, this is not about sex. When we interpret where did I come from as, oh, I have to tell them about adult sex. Oh no, that doesn't fit here. And you're right, it doesn't fit there. But that's our spin. We're actually sexualizing their questions when it has nothing to do with sex. So when a child asks, where did I come from? And we may go, oh my God. Remember, the secret is to teach this subject in the exact same ways as we teach all subjects. And that starts with looking behind the child's eyes and seeing the world as they see it. And where did I come from is a question about where. Literally, if I'm going to use a not so pleasant example, if a child said, where does vomit come from? You wouldn't hesitate. You'd say, oh, stomachs, that's where it comes from. And you might explain about the esophagus and all of that, right? You would know that it is literally a where question. It's not until children are 5 that by the way, the answer is, just like you would say stomach, the answer is uterus. babies grow in uteruses. And the child will likely say, oh, thanks, what's for lunch? I mean, they asked a where question, you gave them a where answer, and they often go another year before they're curious about, wait a minute, how did I get out of there in the first place? And that's not a question about sex either. It's a question about transportation, right? Because they're fascinated by transportation. And at 6, and this is something that I'm very proud of about Science of Babies, is that it is totally attuned to the progression of how young children think in respect to the stages of their cognitive development. So 6-year-olds understand cause and effect. And when they say, but how did I get in there in the first place? They're simply asking a science question, just like they would about many other things. They're asking, you know, everything in life, every effect has a cause, every cause has an effect. I wasn't always here. I understand that now. So what caused me? What brought me into being? And that's about science. It's not about sex.
That was an amazing breakdown. I hope that folks that are watching this live and on the playback are taking notes. You're going to have access to this for 30 days. So feel free to rewind multiple times so and take notes, right? Because that knowledge is power. That knowledge helps us to feel more confident. And like we've said, so many of us just didn't have these conversations. There was way too much avoidance in our school systems if we were, you know, educated outside of the home, and then just in our homes, and then in our cultures. There's so many elements to it. And then there is that other element that often comes too with some folks around, like trauma. You know, there are real experiences that people have had that relate to their bodies, that relate to sex and sexuality, that relate to abuse, that also can just make this stuff super triggering. But like you're saying, by bringing it back to what is this really about, without going from 0 to 100, you know, with assumptions or thinking we've got to whip out a PowerPoint, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why having books like this, these are tools that so many of us didn't have growing up. Our caregivers did not have tools like this to help walk through and find the words to say. So let's take a little peek inside. Let's take a look inside this book that you all have created, because I think it's amazing. Even just in the fact that it's a board book, right? That is a bold message that you're sending, because yes, there are a lot of books, you know, and books continue to be created, thankfully, around these topics. But when we say board book, what are we saying? We're saying we need to be having these talks earlier. So like you all share, 3.5, right? 3.5 and above is the age range, versus thinking this is like later elementary or certainly puberty. Sometimes people wait that long. So what, can you share any insights around, you know, what was y'all's process or your process around, you know, wanting to ensure that this was something that was going to feel like tangible and age congruent for these younger ages?
Yeah, so the book, it says 3.5 plus, right? So, and the questions that children ask often come out at ages 4, 5, and 6 spontaneously. And parents know this because they tell me all the time, these clueless people, right? So think about this. If I have a photograph of one of my granddaughter's other grandmother, and she's sitting with her, she must have been a year old, on her lap, and the child is holding a book called Periods upside down, right? She's just holding the book. There isn't any reason why, if your child doesn't know what algebra is yet, right, that they can't walk around and look through the pages in the book and they'll take whatever it is that they want, but they're familiarizing themselves with very basic concepts. And this is how children learn, in a spiral. We start with very simple concepts and information, and we build on that. That's called Scaffolding, right? They need scaffolding. If we're not giving our children familiarity with some of these concepts very early on, and remember, they're not growing up in a social and cultural vacuum. They're picking up all kinds of stuff that they're just going to have to unlearn later. And by third grade, I am very firm about this. If we haven't, given them this basic spiral of learning before that, and they're like, huh, what? But they're not really, because they've learned all these other things that won't be so helpful. From that point on, and I know this is a very strong statement, but I know it's true. From that point on, what I will try and teach them as an educator is going to have to be remedial. Think about that. I'm going to have to help them unlearn stuff before I can replace it with the scaffolding. Scaffold, you hang things on it, right? The scaffolding for learning, which should have started with the naming of body parts when they were 2. So that's why, and it's one reason it's a board book is it's sturdy, right? Yeah. So it lasts. It can even last for more than one generation. So by reframing the subject as science, everybody wants our kids to know about science. That's the key. That's one of the big game changers for parents. Just because you're anxious and you project that it's about something else doesn't mean it is.
I love that. And we understand this because we will hand them board books. We will be reading many families in infancy are buying little board books or, the little soft books. They're buying books on a bunch of other topics and other subjects. We understand that the building blocks have to be created and they have to be created early, certainly before, they're third grade, 7, 8, 9 years old. And then when we look at it, even from a sexual health perspective, right, too, it's, 8. There are young people that are starting puberty, and bleeding and menstruating and all of that. And so, like you said, the work that you end up having to do is starting, back because, we got to get them caught up to have a frame of reference and understand. Let's take a peek inside with some of these elements. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing what your thought process was in introducing some of these things.
So context is everything when you're teaching anybody. And think back to our own puberty education, there was no context. It was just plopped in one day and then it was gone. At least that was my experience. So it starts, the context here is some basic life messages about similarities and differences. And you'll see in a bit why that's the context that we decided to start with. And you'll notice that we've shown, different body sizes, different races, different just bases.
Representation, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's the message. This is about everybody. It's about all of us.
Yep. It's about humans. And then this image here, what are we doing here with this?
So what we're doing here is, okay, so now we're going to move on to talk about body parts. And some are on the inside where you can't see them, and we're going to see a slide about that in a minute, which I love, or a spread from the book. And some are on the outside where you can see them. So that's building block scaffolding number 2.
Yeah.
And here we're showing inside.
And I love, and there's intentionality too, or at least this is what I'm picking up on. Tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but you're introducing these other parts that we tend to feel totally fine talking about, right? We tend to feel fine saying, yes, you have a heart, you can feel that beating, right? Or, there's a stomach, that's where your food needs to go. And so normalizing, it feels like a little good trickery for the adults involved, to say, well, look, if we're already talking to them at these ages about these things, what else do we need to be talking about?
if you understand that it's all the same and it's not about sex, right?
Yeah.
It's about science and helping children understand. After all, children's first classroom is their bodies. It's always there. It's always doing stuff, making sounds. It feels different to touch. It's a constant companion. So they're endlessly curious about how bodies work. Okay, we can move on.
But they may not get the endless, and this is where, right, this is that part that's just, that deconstructing we have to do, because if we make it okay for them to be so curious about the things that might be going on with these other body parts, we're naming them accurately, these parts, we're walking them through, again, that science piece that you're saying, we have no problem. And then all of a sudden it goes silent if they start to ask about these parts, right?
Yeah. So look at the messages in that. These parts are hopelessly different than others. They don't want to talk about it. I wonder why that is. And like, what's wrong with these parts? That every other part has a real name, and often we use babyish names or slang terms. That's the message we're delivering even when we don't talk about it. Right? We're delivering messages all the time. And those are not messages that will support effective communication. Will not support, oh, if I have a question, I'm going to, my parent or guardian or caretaker or my teacher. I can ask them anything I want to, even about this subject.
Yeah.
Listen, I have run into many students who tell me in the 4th grade that they think these are bad words because you can't say them in school. How's that for a message? They must be bad.
And they're right. They are right, because there will be a reaction many times, more often than not, from an adult that is in that power, role, whether it's the educator, the teacher, a principal, someone. There has been the rules and that have been created, and then in the home, right? If a child goes and touches these body parts, and they get the hand swatted away, or they're told don't touch that, and there's no other context, nothing else, right? It's just continues to reinforce this silence and this brewing shame.
Yeah, so learning about sexuality is part of physical, social, emotional, and intellectual development. So, if I'm touching my genitals, and that's a perfectly good word, is genitals, I don't ever use the phrase private parts, because that makes them separate, different. We don't call shoulders public parts. What we want to teach children is that some of our parts we keep private more often than others, and here's why.
Very good.
Right? It's about keeping them private and understanding why that is. And of course, this is not the whole book, and there is a spread, page spread that deals with that. I remember. Yeah, I want to go back 1 second to that last one. So this is the basic vocabulary of the systems that are baby making systems. And so, yeah, it's okay for children to know these words. And also, I like the word genitals because it pertains to both inside and outside. And that's a concept that, previous to this page, we've been working on.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And now we talk about the sperm and the egg.
Right. So, how when you get a master's degree or a doctoral degree, you have to defend your thesis.
Yeah.
So I defended this book in front of my 5- and 6-year-old grandchildren. The older one was my consultant, but the younger ones hadn't seen it yet. And I'm crossing my fingers. And this is how I knew that we were, really in the right direction here, because the 5-year-old, almost 6, looked at this page and she read it and she loved the squiggly line on the bottom. But then she said, but how do they get together? Logical science. Oh, this is inside that body. This is inside that body. How do they come together? And there's a slide, there are pages after this that talk about the different ways that that can happen, and also talks about pleasure and intimacy, which we tend to steer away from. I suppose, oh, if they know it's pleasurable, they'll run right out and do it. No, we don't have to tell them it's pleasurable. When they touch their genitals, they feel pleasurable sensations. Right?
That's that cause and effect, right? That cause and effect relation. Yeah.
That's how my body works. Touching my genitals feels different than pulling on my ear. Isn't that interesting? But if somebody comes by and frowns, oh, they don't look that way when I'm touching this. I'm going to keep my eye on that. And if it continues and if it's negative, that's where shame comes in.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, nose picking, right? There are so many messages, societal messages that can come from that act of exploring the holes that might be on our face, and certain holes, when we touch them or when we do, they get different reactions.
I'm hoping my next book or the one after, is going to be called Body Openings.
Ooh,
another thing that children really need to get, that things can come in and things can go out, and here's why.
So. I love that. These things so need to be normalized in our societies. And so in this particular image here, we're going inside, right? And so you're showing how they come together.
Right, but that's not the only way. So you'll see at the top, unfortunately, with the 16-page word book, it's just impossible to deal with every variation very specifically. So the sentence above the fallopian tube opens the door. And by the way, there will be an online guide for parents and teachers who can. Okay, so how do you take that apart? That sentence on the right at the top, right? How do you explain those different ways to a child? But see, what we don't get is it's all the same. Every human being who ever existed started out from the joining of an egg cell and a sperm cell, right?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that we have to have that education that we didn't get. So many of us didn't get, and it seems so simple. And so this is why books like this, really are, in many cases, teaching the grown-ups at the same time, and that's okay. And so I think it's so important that as grown-ups, we continue to realize that we're always, hopefully we feel comfortable with always being on a learning journey, and that we can be curious with our young people. It's not our job to know all of the answers. It's just our job to create that space that feels safe for these brave questions. And then we can say, that's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I've got this cool book that we can open up together and we can read it, right?
Absolutely. That was beautifully said.
And so what happens then? So that sperm and that egg, they come together, and then this image here is really cool. I really like how y'all laid this out.
Yeah, it really, and so you can see, and so if you've explained on the previous page that there are different ways of this happening, then you can notice, now we're ready to talk about the growth. See how logical it is? It follows a very logical and ordered path. So what happens after that sperm and egg join? And these are fascinating images, and so many adults I've showed this page to have just been glued to it. They think that the illustrator, who's fabulous, did such a wonderful job with this.
Yes, and I want to acknowledge that. So again, Birdhouse Kids Media is the publisher, right? And we've talked about Birdhouse Kids before. In particular, the Clementine Wants to Know app, which is a super cool app that families can download. And Clementine is the young character. And Clementine actually makes an appearance in this book. Is that right?
Yes, Clementine does. And if you want to see what Clementine looks like, you can go to the Kickstarter page.
Yes.
because there's a shot of her. And in the book itself, there's where she's more prominent is when she's the belly is out, right? And she has the ear up on the belly listening to the heartbeat. And what's so cool about the amazing video that's at the beginning of the Kickstarter page is that there are sound effects.
So, yeah, it has the in utero sounds.
Love dub, love dub, love, while she's going like this. I just tickled my fancy.
I love it. I love it.
The publisher at Birdhouse is just amazing, so incredibly creative. I'm very, very fortunate. He's been wanting to do this book for a very long time, long before he met me.
And I will say, Edouard is joining us. Hi, Edouard. Little shout out moment to folks that are on the live. Definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree. And so then the book, and just to be clear, if just in case it wasn't obvious, the pages that we're sharing are not all the pages of the book. Again, it's a board book, so it's not one of these big, thick, long books, because age congruent, you know, we're keeping it in these early stages. So there are some pages, and that pleasure one that you mentioned, that was something, of course, doing the type of work that I do, and, you know, around sex positivity and pleasure positivity. When I saw the word pleasure in a board book, I was sold. And that's why I felt, you know, so called to want to collaborate in this way to help spread the message, because I know that so many families that follow our work, you know, sex positive families, they're just so hungry for these kinds of resources so they can help create healthier opportunities for their next generation and break down those taboos that haven't been helpful for us. So thank you for putting pleasure, the word pleasure, in the book.
Absolutely. And that's not so hard to explain to kids either. You know, our senses bring us all kinds of pleasures, right? So if you teach kids about the central nervous system, so for example, if you close your eyes, you don't see anything. You open your eyes, you see. That's because light has come in through your pupil. And so I'm normalizing it. It's like, as I said before, it's all the same. It's just part of how our body works. So that I'm always looking for just the right context to make this subject not different, but the same.
Yes. And then there's that safety piece, right? When we can help them recognize the things that feel good to their body, they also can recognize the things that do not, and that helps keep them safer. So this education is life affirming, and it's life saving in a lot of, you know, ways too. So this is the last page, right? This is the literal last page of the book,
right?
Last spread. So you're bringing it back to family here.
Yeah, so this book is about science, but it is also about love and sharing and intimacy and closeness and diversity and all of those things. So that the science, I want everybody to understand, even the science, particularly around issues of sex, gender, and reproduction, needs to be put into the context of the whole human being.
Yes.
We're not walking, talking genitals, are we?
No. Some people might have something to say about that, but you're correct.
We're human beings who happen to have genitals.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. I love it. So we are winding into the last 15 minutes of this. This has been an incredible peek, a generous peek into this great book and this great resource. Here, I'd like to offer the opportunity here and highlight that, again, this is a Kickstarter, right? So there's an opportunity here for anyone watching, and of course, if you've been following us on across our socials and in our newsletter, you know, we've been talking about this as a resource that you can support, that you can help play a part in being an early backer and helping this book come to life. And you all are super, super close. I tried to get this image as soon before this started, so close. You still have 30 days, right?
Right.
So folks can support, right, in this way.
Absolutely. And this book is going to be published no matter what. This will enable us to gather pre-orders so that as soon as the book is done, they're being sent out to folks before they're in bookstores or on Amazon. So this is, it supports the project for sure. And in addition, what you can do is pre-order books as your way of supporting the project.
And so did I hear you, does that give you early access to it before?
The books are the first people to receive these books when they are finally printed and ready for delivery, right? The first people who will get them are the people who pre-ordered.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And you're definitely going to want to have this. And, you know, some of the folks that have joined us on the live, you know, the age ranges that you all have of these children in your life are just so perfect, you know, and this is a great starter. There are other books out there, and some of them can be overwhelming, right? There's just trying to pack so much into a book. This just gives you just enough. And I love that you all are having a guide, a companion digital guide and resource. I love the fact that there are other products. Again, we mentioned the app. There are ways that many tools that you can use so that you feel supported as the grown-up in the equation, and you can answer these questions with more confidence. Speaking of questions, for the folks that are on the live, if you have questions for Deborah, this would be a great time to ask them, and we will love to answer them. So whether they're questions about this book, whether they're questions about the strategies around how to have these conversations, we would love to have them. Hi, hi Ashley.
I have loved this. Thank you so much for doing this. This is so awesome. So thank you. I have a whole page full of notes. But one of the questions I actually had this problem on my way to school this morning, was we try to use actual terms for physical parts of the body, but it's hard for me when I'm sending my kids to school to remind them that they shouldn't say those words at school. And I know they're not bad or dirty words, but they will get in trouble if they say those words at school.
Oh, think of that.
Knowing
this stuff will get you in trouble when it's the opposite, right?
Right. What's your advice on that?
Well, I think there are two ways to go on that one. One is to make sure that your child understands that these words, and this is the truth, are not totally like other words in that they are about parts of the body that are considered personal and private. And that's a life lesson. This is not about this topic and that age. It's a life lesson. And we've sort of lost this lesson in American society. Words have power. And so that we want to be careful with our words. Words have wonderful power to do wonderful things. And also they're so powerful, they can do bad things. I mean, so that again, it's not, shh, you can't talk about this. It's let's, something else I always like to say, even though I don't know that it's true, is that, you know what? All families in America love to talk about this stuff with their children. So we'll not tell other kids so they can have that delight. Then here's the other school of thought. So why not, right? Why shouldn't it be the kids who actually know something about these topics who are spreading information around on the playground? Wouldn't that be a novel and refreshing idea?
Peer educators.
Yes, very good, peer educators. So that I have had parents, so many parents tell me, my child asked a wonderful question and I didn't answer it because I was afraid they'd go to school with it. See, this is what keeps us stuck as a culture, generation after generation. To me, that would be, as a parent, that would, or a grandparent, that would be a signal to go up to the school administration and say, you know what, I just decided not to tell my child a perfectly appropriate piece of information in response to a question I was asked, and I didn't do it because of fear. And if I'm afraid that, or if the school is afraid, that puts adult needs at the center. Mm-hmm. And what this book does is it puts children's needs at the center. And by the way, you would be, how many stories have I heard about children who were born, who were conceived in a way, let's say in vitro fertilization, whose parents have been really open about it, and they sit at the lunch table and they share all the details with kids who are around them, like in kindergarten or first grade, and the kids are totally enthralled. So as I say, I can go either way, but the second way is what I would really like to support. The other thing is, kids like your child are not the ones who go to school and say all kinds of stuff, because they just think it's information. Kids who spread that stuff around do it because they know, surprise, surprise, they pick this up, that sex gets attention. There's something that people think that is about sex gets attention. So it's manipulative. Right?
Because they're seeing that kind of reaction in their home, most likely, also because there's that silence, there's right. that triggered reaction. I love that. Yeah.
In fact, you know, there's a social pyramid for kids as well in elementary school, as well as other divisions. And, you know, they learn, but this is one of the ways they learn about social power. Right? The person who knows the most about this subject wins. So we support them in making it like a contest when we don't normalize it and treat it like everything else.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. And Ashley, thank you for doing the loving work in your home to have these conversations and for showing up, you know, here. This is how we break the cycles. This is how we create that change, you know, and it starts many times with us doing that unlearning and that relearning. When we can model that for our kids, model that, you know, learning never stops and that there's so much to be curious about. That's just so powerful, you know.
Thank you. And I love the whole angle of science. Like, this isn't something dirty. They're not asking some really complicated question. It's just science. And that has been, I'm just so grateful for this and for the online resource too. It's just a great reminder that it's not bad. It's not dirty. It's just science.
Thank you, Ashley. I really appreciate it. And do tell your friends about it, because we want to make this we want to put this in the hands of as many parents as we possibly can.
And schools too. I saw on the Kickstarter, right, that you all have like some bundle deals, like for the early childhood centers, especially. These would be so fabulous for preschools and elementary schools to just have on their bookshelves, reading time. Here we go.
Exactly. And here we parents have to be advocates. I once heard an elementary school principal in a very progressive county, right? I suggested, when I said it's best not to call them private parts, but you call them what they are, which is genitals, that she almost fell off her chair.
I believe it.
She said the school board in this county would never let us use the word genitals. That's how stuck we are. And unless we get unstuck, nothing is going to change.
That's right. what other questions can we answer? We've got about 6 minutes left. We want to certainly honor you all's time. And Deborah, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, my
for
privilege.
being here and doing the amazing work that you do. You've given so many gems, so many tangible tools and strategies. And then this book, this is a gift to the world, and what we so desperately need to happen earlier than it's been happening. So I will keep watch in case any questions pop up. I want to drop into the chat your website, so sexandsensibility.net. Highly encourage you to check out the other great books and the work that Deborah does and has been doing for years, for decades, right? And this is just about teaching young people, equipping young people with with context around these very human things that they deserve to know. And let me go ahead and also drop in the Kickstarter link in case anyone wants to make that their next step. I highly, highly recommend the more resources that we have out here in this world. And I love what you said too, well, and making sure, so if your kids are enrolled right now in any kind of school or program, or this is an opportunity to get involved in ensuring that your districts, wherever, young people are learning that are near you, this is a resource that you can help advocate to get into the hands of these programs.
Absolutely. Melissa, I have to say that the tribute that you gave to this book just now, coming from you, means everything to me.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. It's just been so amazing. I really appreciate these opportunities, and willingness to collaborate. So many people trust the recommendations that we put out there for really great resources like this. So like I said, as soon as you all shared, that little sneak peek with me, I was like, yep, whatever we need to do here to just help spread the word, because more people need to know about this. And I'm excited. Like you said, this is what's the timeline for when we can expect this book to be available?
Well, Edward, why don't you speak up about that, since you know these things much better than I do?
Hi, everyone. This is Edward. I'm the publisher from Birdhouse Kids. It's great to be here. Let me just say, to answer your question, if you go to the Kickstarter page, you can get an idea of what the timeline is. We very, specifically demonstrate to our backers what is our plan. And you can see that once the Kickstarter campaign ends, we are ready to ship the book for print. And that would mean that it would eventually arrive to backers at the beginning of next year, sometime around February, or even earlier than that.
Awesome. Hopefully this pandemic stuff doesn't, because I know that's caused a lot of random delays for production things and everything. Hopefully things keep going, because yeah, that would be beautiful to have this early next year.
Yes.
I'll add also that the Kickstarter page is very comprehensive. In lots of ways, also because there is a Q&A section, commonly asked questions, some of which we've actually talked about today. So it's an educational document in itself, and I'm very, very proud of the work that Birdhouse has done in putting all of this together.
Well, we are right at time, and I so appreciate you, Deborah. Thank you, Edouard. The work that you all are doing to create this resource is just incredible. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, this is a resource that you're going to want to watch again and take lots of notes. Like Ashley said, take those notes. Feel free to reference it. And check out sexandsensibility.net. And of course, sexpositivefamilies.com. We think we already have this book in, and if not, I'll double check, but linked up in our recommended resources. We just have so many resources nowadays as adults, as caring adults, to help make these things easier. So let's go ahead and use them. Let's make sure we share them. Let's make sure we help communities be able to do this different for the next generations and for ourselves. Thank you so much, Deborah.
My pleasure.